Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. I just finished writing a book yesterday actually, and in the course of writing that book I had thoughts about the writing process. I don't have any talking points for this video, and many of the thoughts that passed through my mind probably are not recapturable. But I thought I would just make a little video regardless to talk about the project and what that entailed. So this is an early book of mine. Sonnets, more than being an early book of mine, it's the first book of mine. And when I say that, the first book can mean any number of different things. It's the first book that I actually set out to write as a book. There's one that preceded it, which was, I think I was about age 30. I just collected all of the sundry poems I had written and tried to assemble them together into a book. I wanted to feel like I had been doing something. And it was hard collecting them all, but I did, and I had a very slim volume. So that is my first book. But Sonnets is the first book where I set out to write a book and wrote a book. So it's a extended sequence of poems in the sonnet form, based no doubt upon the volume of Shakespeare's sonnets, which has come down to us. So that's really my first book. I wish back in those old days I had been keeping a journal or taking notes about when these things happened, because I'm not really clear about the time of it. It might have been 1994. The thing was, I also, at that highly charged time, wrote my first play. So I don't know if the play came before this and hence gave me the momentum to actually try writing a book of poems, or if it came after. I suspect the play came first, but regardless, this is my first book of poems. My first book of poems that was intended to be so, as opposed to just a compilation. So I have written other sonnets over the years here and there, just individually. A couple of other of my books will have the occasional sonnet in them. And a few of my books use the sonnet as a stanza form. The Italians did that. And it's really hard to know what is the difference between a sequence of sonnets or a poem composed of multiple sonnets. There is a distinction, I think, however, at least from the standpoint of the writer when you are writing them. So most of my books tended to be in multiples, let's say. Not that they were thematically related, but discussing the forms of the poems. My book Against Holy War utilized a certain stanza form, and then I did two others at different times in the same form. I did a book of villanelles, The Condemnation, about which I've talked, and then subsequently, within the next decade, produced two more books of villanelles. But I never did another book of sonnets, and I don't know exactly why I never touched it again, but that was why when I started this book less than 2 weeks ago, the new book, I mean, I was overwhelmed by a sense of feeling that it would be my last book. I saw that attack coming. it was quite a feeling of exhilaration to think that I might be working on my last book. Now, the transition phase between being a normal person and writing a book of poems or being receptive to the muses is kind of tough. That's probably the hardest aspect of this whole business. And so yesterday I finished the new book. I had been up most of the night working on it and into the morning. It's not 24 hours gone yet. And then I had to type out the last few pages. I like to get that out. I'm superstitious. And then very shortly thereafter, we had to go. I had to drive an hour, and we met with some friends, and then there was drinking involved. And then we came back, and then I had more chores I had to do, and then I fell asleep, not having had much sleep the previous night. And so this is my first morning to have a semblance of normalcy. The alcohol did not help, but it was a social situation, and what can you do? So I have not yet picked up Runciman. I will try to do it later this evening before bed. I hope I'm much more like a normal person at that point. It occurred to me that the real comparison for writing a book and inserting that into your life is something akin to being in a really bad car accident, but one where you survive intact, but nevertheless you're entirely shaken up. And that's what the feeling of writing a book is like, especially when it is an all-consuming affair. Now, I should say, when I talk about writing at any given point, I am talking specifically about writing poetry and writing the type of poetry that I do. I'm not talking about writing a book of history. I'm not talking about anything else. So here, I should show you this. This is what I used to look. Now this book was not, let's see if we can, this book was not published anywhere near when it was written. So it might have been 8 years or so after the composition of it that it finally made it to the printer. So I would have been even younger looking than that. So it's been though probably a good, well, let's see, probably almost a good 30 years between the first book and the last book. Now, I'm not sure that it's going to be my last book. There have been other times in life when I've thought that I had written my last book. When I wrote my big epic, The Requiem, I thought, that's it. I've said it. I don't need to do anything more. It turned out that was not the case. In this instance, I do hope that this is the last book of poems that I write. I will continue to write individual poems on occasion, and there's nothing to stop me at that point from assembling them into a volume. I mean, if I wanted to do the clerical task of scouring through all of the old manuscripts, I could probably come up with another couple of books right now. My exception to writing would be that if some kind of occasion came up for writing plays, I might consider leaping into that. The whole process whereby I wrote my poems kind of got stoppered when my countrymen elected Donald Trump as president, and it became clear that the type of plays which I wrote could not be created anymore. However, I understand pretty well that you do not need to have a free society to have a flourishing artistic culture. You don't need free speech for poems to get written. You don't need free speech for people to live good lives. And I've always, at the back of my head, wanted to write historical plays, and I've never figured it out. I've made numerous attempts. Number one, the reading for the research would stop me. I couldn't handle it most of the time. And the other thing was figuring out how to frame the dramatic action. Pardon me. The one play that I did successfully, if you will, that was historical, took place with a trial, and that kind of is a ready-made setup. But otherwise, how to do the sort of things, say, that Shakespeare or any number of other dramatics. Now I'm getting confused. I was going to say dramatic playwrights, which doesn't make any sense. I meant historic playwrights. Any techniques which they have used generally are not applicable to whatever it was I want to do. Anyhow, this is going off on a long aside. I'm very well with not writing any more plays because the whole process of that, because they are in verse, the plays that I write, still involves this whole transitional state of going from being a living human being to being a extremely passive receptacle to what the muses are delivering. And I say it that way, reading is something of a passive affair. Children, I think, have to be broken a little bit in order to be made to sit still and read. It's not something that just comes naturally. And writing is, if reading is passive, writing is even more so, and that's where you get people talking about it as being a state akin to death. Now, I have not experienced death yet, so I won't speak on that subject. So that is the story of the new book. The first one was called Sonnets, and I was given the luxury of not having to think of a title for the new book, so the new book will simply be called Sonnets Second Series. Now, the next step for me in this game is to figure out, well, I have to go through it and correct it. I can't do that just yet. I hope to start reading some before I have to go back into that world. But then I have to figure out something as far as getting Microsoft Word. I may just jump in and buy a subscription that then I must cancel so that I can get the thing uploaded onto lulu.com with my collection of other books. This book, of course, you're not going to find at Lulu because it's one of my first 5 which were published prior to the days of print on demand, prior to the days of places like Lulu or Create Space at Amazon existing. You can still find it, and if this sounds interesting to you, there is a quote on the back: "A laudable ability to think in the sonnet form, to make use of its logic, and to keep its formal promises," which Richard Wilbur generously consented for me to put on the back of the, I'm sniffling in the morning, on the back of the book, although the rest of the quote was something, these poems are hideously laughable, but you have a laudable ability, blah, blah, blah. So, of course, I judiciously cropped that quote, and that's what you have on the back. So you just have to do the best you can with these. This actually got a review or 2, and somebody criticized all of the these and thous in some of the poems, and then backtracked a little and said, well, I suppose if you're talking to Almighty God, that sort of address may be appropriate. So these contain some of those. In fact, the first poem has some God business, I think, or Jesus business. And I went back to some of that in the last book. The habit never entirely left me. I write as it pleases me, not as it pleases you. So I would be very curious. That book, it will probably take some weeks before it comes out. I will, of course, do a little unboxing video. And when it does, I would be more than happy if you feel like you want to read the new book, that you consider getting the very first book. It would be something to compare. Technically, I can't think that there's much difference between them, but thematically, by gosh, there's got to be some changes. This, of course, was just starting out, feeling my way. And with this last book, I really, throughout, had the sense of wrapping it up. I never wanted to die in the middle of writing a book and then leave a work unfinished. That always sort of annoys me when I see that has happened to the work written by some author that I really like. And so I'm always a little bit anxious the further I get into the writing of a new book. And in this case, I made it through. Now all I have to do is get it up on the website. And God willing, that will be my last book of poetry. I will leave it at there. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.